Okay, well, in those days, of course, he was staying with Akong Rinpoche. And when I asked them how long they'd known each other, they looked at each other and gabbled away in Tibetan and then worked out it was about 400 and something years. And in those days, it was obvious that although they were very close and they were good friends, Trungpa Rinpoche was the senior, in that Akong was the one that did the running around and acted sort of as his attendant. And because in those days when we first knew them, they didn't really know anyone much. One weekend, my mother and I would go to Oxford, and the next weekend they would come to visit us in London. And we would just talk, we'd go for walks. Trungpa would talk a little bit about, Milarepa and things like that. I mean, I can't say that he gave very much actual instruction, and certainly, he didn't say, well, first you start off by doing your preliminary practices or anything like that. It was more just, I had read little bits, what little there was in about Tibetan Buddhism, and so I would ask him questions about that, and he would answer, and we would argue. And in those days, he was very traditional as far as his answers were concerned. And he definitely dropped that later on. But in that time, he was very towing the party line. He was very good at flower arrangements, and whenever he came, we would have flowers ready for him, and he would sit on the floor and make sort of Japanese-style flower arrangements. And he was very talented at that, and he enjoyed doing that. He also enjoyed my steak and kidney pies, because I think it reminded him of sort of Tibetan stuff, sort of. I don't know. I mean, he was the way he is, I mean, well, obviously he was always trying to get me to sleep with him. And obviously I was always resisting that, because he presented himself as such a nice, pure monk, who had never been tempted before until he came into my presence, and I thought, oh, come on, pull the other leg, it's got bells on, but I figured that when he was in India, he hadn't had the opportunity. So that was what that was all about. But apart from that, so on that level, he wasn't anything like I expected a Lama to be. I mean, I had met a few Lamas by this time. And also one has one's own ideals of how Lamas should act. And Trungpa certainly wasn't like that. But I kept feeling inside, this is the real thing. That he was something special. And I didn't know what it was about him that made me feel, despite his not always being, how I expected a Lama to be, he was something special.
In what way?
I can't say, because I couldn't say at that time what it was about him that made you feel that there was something very genuine. It wasn't anything outward. It wasn't even anything he said. It was just a certain something, I guess, one got just being in his presence. So it is possible that if he had asked me to stay, I would have stayed. He didn't, of course. He said that, no, you have to go because you belong to somebody else. And after I met Kamta Rinpoche, and while I was there, before I met Kamta Rinpoche, I had a sense of Trungpa's presence, and he wrote and said, did you recognize me the other night? And did you recognize me on such and such occasions? But I didn't actually recognize him, but I did feel he was very near. And then after I met Kamta Rinpoche, then he wrote and said, now you don't need me anymore, you've met the one you belong to.
That was independently of him, of any input from anyone else? That, I mean, did he just come to that conclusion? I mean, in other words, did you meet Khamtrul Rinpoche, and then amount of time later, you get this letter from Trungpa Rinpoche just saying, "Oh, okay, you're on the right track." And
well, yeah, I mean, I must have written to him and said I'd met Rinpoche, but anyway, he also wrote and said like that, and then after that, I didn't feel his presence near anymore. That was taken over by Rinpoche.